They pinned her against the hood of her own car, hands wrenching at her arms, voices barking orders she couldn't understand through the panic. Her crime? Driving a brand-new luxury SUV through the wrong neighborhood while being a young black woman. Keys in hand, registration on the dashboard, none of it mattered. As the cuffs snapped closed around her wrists and neighbors pulled out their phones, Shayla realized. They didn't see a driver. They saw a thief. But this time, they targeted the wrong one. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. The Texas sun was already burning the pavement when Shayla Grant turned onto Crestwood Drive, her new pearl-white Lexus gleaming under the clear blue sky. She smiled as she adjusted the sunglasses on her nose, another small victory she had worked hard for. At 29, Shayla was the youngest department head at a top Houston architecture firm. Late nights, missed holidays, endless prove-yourself meetings. This car was more than transportation. It was proof. She tapped the steering wheel to the rhythm of the music playing softly through the speakers, navigating the quiet suburban streets lined with sprawling lawns and polished mailboxes. It was supposed to be a quick drive. She was picking up a catering order for a firm event. But then she noticed it, a black and white cruiser pulling out from a side street, trailing her. At first, she thought nothing of it, until the second cruiser appeared, and then a third. Shayla's stomach twisted. She flicked on her blinker, slowed to the speed limit exactly. The flashing lights erupted behind her, sudden, sharp, blinding. She pulled to the curb immediately, heart hammering against her ribs. Before she could even lower the window, the first officer, a stocky man with a sun-reddened face, was at her door, shouting, "Out of the vehicle! Hands where we can see them!" Startled, Shayla fumbled with the door lock. "What's going on, officer?" she asked, her voice trembling despite herself. He yanked the door open before she could finish, grabbing her arm roughly. "Step out. Now." Other officers swarmed, guns drawn, barking orders over each other. Neighbors appeared on lawns, phones raised, whispering, "I have my registration. It's right there on the dashboard." Shayla cried, pointing frantically. The stocky officer slammed her against the hood, the heat from the metal searing her bare forearms. "You're driving a stolen vehicle," he snapped. "No, this is my car," Shayla gasped. But they weren't listening. The cuffs clicked shut around her wrists, cutting deep into her skin. Her bag tumbled from the passenger seat to the asphalt, spilling neatly stacked work documents, her office badge, her firm-issued laptop, clear, tangible proof that she wasn't who they thought she were. None of it mattered. She was already guilty, judged and sentenced on sight. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she bit them back. Crying would only feed the story they wanted to tell. The officer radioed something into his shoulder mic, glancing at the Lexus suspiciously, as if expecting it to sprout legs and run. The others patted her down roughly, ignoring her protests. Across the street, a teenage boy filmed silently, his expression hollow. Shayla squeezed her eyes shut. She wasn't naive. She knew what this was. But she also knew something they didn't. Something they would regret ever underestimating. Because Shayla Grant wasn't just another target. And she wasn't done fighting. The ride to the precinct was a blur of flashing lights and grinding humiliation. Shayla sat stiffly in the back of the cruiser, wrists cuffed tightly behind her back, the rough plastic seat scraping against her skin with every bump in the road. The officer in the front passenger seat, a younger man with close-cropped blonde hair, kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Suspicious, disgusted, amused. She stared straight ahead, refusing to meet his gaze. When they pulled up to the station, the sergeant yanked her roughly from the car, ignoring her wince of pain. Inside, the air was heavy with the stench of sweat, bleach, and something sour. Shayla was marched past rows of desks where officers barely looked up. Just another body being processed, just another statistic. At the intake desk, a bored-looking clerk asked without glancing up. "Charges?" The sergeant dropped her paperwork onto the counter with a thud. "Grand theft auto. Resisting arrest." Shayla's mouth dropped open. "That's a lie. I didn't resist. This is my car." The clerk finally looked at her and immediately lost interest. "Take her to holding," he said flatly. They led her down a narrow, grimy hallway to a small cinder-block room lined with metal benches bolted to the walls. A group of women, some dozing, some staring blankly at the floor, occupied a few of the benches. The sergeant shoved Shayla inside and slammed the door. The heavy lock clicked shut behind her. She stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a routine check. This was a setup. And she knew, once charges were filed, even false ones, the system would start grinding her down. One bureaucratic lie at a time. She crossed the room carefully, avoiding the stairs, and sat on an empty stretch of bench. The cold metal bit through her skirt, but she didn't move. She needed to think. Fast. Time here wasn't measured in hours. It was measured in how quickly they could break you. A female guard appeared at the door with a clipboard. Name? Shayla raised her chin. Shayla Grant. The guard scribbled something without looking. Occupation? Shayla hesitated, then said it clearly. Department head. Houston Architecture Group. The guard snorted. Sure you are. The clipboard slapped against her side as she turned and left. Shayla's hands clenched into fists against the bench. They didn't believe her. They didn't want to believe her. They had already decided what she was, and nothing she said, no amount of evidence, was going to change it. Not here. Not now. Hours passed. No one came to check her ID. No one came to verify the car's registration. No one even mentioned allowing her a phone call. They wanted her disappeared, bureaucratically buried, filed under another thief, another arrest, another problem solved. But they didn't know the world Shayla came from. They didn't know the woman they had locked up. Because Shayla Grant didn't climb her way out of nowhere to be broken by a system that couldn't even bother to check her name. And she wasn't waiting to be rescued. She was already planning her counterattack. The door creaked open again. This time, two officers entered, one tall and lean with a hawkish nose, the other broad and heavy-set, his badge hanging low on his chest. The lean officer tapped his nightstick against his thigh as he spoke. Shayla Grant, you got a choice to make. She didn't move from the bench. Didn't blink. The broad one grunted. You can sign a statement admitting you stole that Lexus. He leaned closer, his breath hot and sour. Or you can sit in here until Monday. Maybe longer. Up to you. It was Friday afternoon. Monday was an eternity away. Shayla's throat tightened, but her voice stayed level. That's my car. I have the registration. The purchase documents. Check the glove compartment. Call the dealership. Run the plates. The lean officer snickered. Oh, we will. In our own time. He pulled a crumpled form from his back pocket and slapped it onto the bench beside her. Or you can make it easy on yourself. Sign. Plead guilty. Maybe get probation if you're lucky. Shayla stared at the paper. Pre-printed lines. Blank spaces for her confession. She looked up slowly, meeting the officer's gaze. No. The heavy one's smile thinned. Suit yourself. It's a long weekend. They left without another word, the doors slamming hard enough to rattle the walls. The other women in the holding cell shifted uncomfortably, stealing glances at her. One of them, an older woman with deep lines etched into her face, caught Shayla's eye. She shook her head slowly, mouthing, "Don't sign." Shayla leaned back against the wall, her heart hammering. She knew exactly what they were doing. Trap her into a false confession. Wreck her record permanently. Erase her credibility. And if she broke now, if she gave them what they wanted, no one would care about the truth later. A black woman with a grand theft conviction? It wouldn't matter that it had been forced out of her. It would follow her forever. Job applications, credit checks, loan approvals, even apartment leases. One lie today would be a life sentence tomorrow. Her mind raced. She needed to get a message out. Someone who could verify her identity. Someone who could force them to look, really look. She thought fast. Her firm's senior partner, William Hargrove. White, old money, deeply connected. His signature was on half the buildings in downtown Houston. If he made a call, if he applied pressure, they couldn't ignore it. But first, she needed a phone. She needed access. And sitting here, waiting obediently, wasn't going to get it. Shayla stood slowly, stretching out her stiff arms. She walked to the door and knocked firmly. A guard appeared on the other side, scowling. What? Shayla straightened her spine. I want my phone call. Now. The guard's lip curled. You'll get it when we say you get it. That's a violation of my rights, she said, her voice cold and steady. And when my attorney files the lawsuit, you'll be named personally. The guard hesitated. Fear flashed across his eyes, just for a second. He slammed the hatch closed without answering. But Shayla smiled thinly as she turned back to the bench. The first crack had formed. They weren't invincible. They just thought no one would dare fight them. They thought wrong. An hour passed. Then two. Shayla sat stiffly on the bench, muscles aching, wrist bruised where the cuffs had bitten deep. The hatch on the cell door finally scraped open again. A different officer peered in, younger, uncertain. He cleared his throat. "You'll get your call. 1. Make it quick." Shayla stood immediately, every step deliberate. They led her down a dim hallway to a tiny booth tucked between two vending machines, a single battered phone bolted to the wall. The officer unlocked one cuff, leaving the other attached to a metal ring on the table. She ignored the indignity, dialed fast. 2 rings. Then the familiar gruff voice answered. "Hargrove." Shayla spoke quickly, calmly, her voice tight with urgency. "Mr. Hargrove, it's Shayla Grant. I've been wrongfully arrested. They're charging me with grand theft auto. I need help. Now." A sharp intake of breath on the other end. Silence. Then, "Where are you?" "Fulton Precinct 19. Another pause. Then the old man's voice, cold and deadly serious. "Sit tight. You're not alone." The line went dead. The officer yanked the phone from her hand. "Time's up." He marched her back to the cell. But Shayla's heart beat differently now. Not in fear. In readiness. Because now the game had changed. Now someone with real power knew where she was. And he wouldn't move quietly. Minutes dragged. The buzz of fluorescent lights above. The heavy smell of unwashed concrete. The sharp murmur of guards passing by. Then faint at first, the rising sound of something else. Raised voices. Shouting. The unmistakable bark of authority being challenged. The women around Shayla sat up straighter, tension filling the air like static. Through the tiny window in the cell door, Shayla glimpsed the chaos unfolding. A sharply dressed man in a dark gray suit, William Hargrove, stormed into the intake area, flanked by 2 other men in expensive suits and a woman holding a leather portfolio. Attorneys. Big ones. From the best firm in Houston. Behind them, 2 uniformed officers trailed nervously, faces tight. Shayla couldn't hear every word, but the tone was unmistakable. False arrest. Illegal detention. Violation of civil rights. The station commander, a barrel-chested man with gray at his temples, looked trapped between fury and panic. He barked orders. Guards scattered. Someone fumbled with paperwork at the front desk. Minutes later, the cell door clanked open. The young guard, now pale, his hands trembling slightly, motioned Shayla forward. "You're being released," he mumbled. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a cold, bureaucratic retreat. Shayla walked out with her head high, ignoring the burning stares from the officers lined along the walls. Hargrove approached her, placing a heavy hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "But we're not done." He turned sharply to the officers. "Every name involved in this travesty," he said coldly, "will be delivered to my legal team by the end of today. Or we start filing federal complaints first thing Monday morning." Shayla didn't look back as they led her toward the exit. She didn't need to. She had seen enough. The system that had tried to silence her had been forced to choke on its own corruption. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because the people who did this? They didn't believe they were wrong. They believed they were untouchable. And Shayla Grant was about to show them just how wrong they were. The moment Shayla stepped into the sunlight, she inhaled deeply, a slow, deliberate breath that tasted like freedom and fire all at once. But she wasn't celebrating. She wasn't smiling. She was calculating. Because she understood something now, something deeper than anger. This wasn't just about her. It was about the hundreds, the thousands of black men and women who never got the chance to walk out free. This time, she had the power to fight back. And she would. Not with rage. Not with chaos. But with the sharpest weapon she owned, her mind. Inside the black town car waiting at the curb, Hargrove handed her a tablet preloaded with files. "I pulled everything you'll need," he said quietly. "Personnel records. Prior complaints. Misconduct reports. Civil settlements. All of it." Shayla flipped through the documents, her jaw tightening with every page. Patterns. Suppressed grievances. Whistleblower testimonies ignored. Internal memos warning about racial profiling buried. Lawsuits quietly settled out of court with strict non-disclosure agreements. It wasn't a few bad actors. It was systemic. And it was built on the assumption that no one powerful enough would ever care enough to challenge it. Until now. Because what none of them realized when they cuffed her, when they shoved her against the hood of her own car, when they humiliated her in front of strangers, was that Shayla Grant wasn't just an architect of buildings. She was an architect of systems. Systems they thought were indestructible. Systems she now knew exactly how to tear down. She turned to Hargrove, her voice steady. "I want a full federal civil rights lawsuit. I want individual officers named, no blanket department responsibility. And I want a Title VI investigation opened into racial bias within the precinct. Hargrove smiled thinly. Thought you might say that. He slid a second folder across the seat. Inside, a team roster of the best civil rights attorneys in the state, already briefed and ready to move. By the end of the day, Shayla's attorneys filed formal complaints with the U.S. Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, the Texas State Bar Ethics Committee, the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Public Corruption Unit. No deals. No silent settlements. Only exposure. By nightfall, reporters began calling. By morning, local news carried the headline. Houston architect files federal lawsuit against police after wrongful arrest. Inside the precinct walls, the panic began immediately. Commanders convened emergency meetings. Lawyers were dispatched. And quietly, desperately, calls were made up the chain, begging for political favors, backroom protection. But the ground was already shifting under their feet. Because Shayla Grant wasn't interested in being another forgotten name. She wasn't here to settle. She wasn't here to forgive. She was here to build a reckoning. And this time, there would be no escape. It took less than 72 hours for the cracks to split wide open. The first domino to fall was Officer Jim Rhodes, the stocky, red-faced man who had slammed Shayla against her own hood. An anonymous leak, confirmed by Shayla's legal team, revealed Rhodes had been cited for excessive force 3 times in the past 5 years. Each time, the complaints had mysteriously vanished after internal review. Each time, the victims had one thing in common: black skin. By Monday morning, Rhodes was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. But Shayla wasn't interested in leaves. She was interested in consequences. Next came the internal memos, leaked to the press by an unnamed whistleblower inside the department. Emails between senior officers surfaced, casually referring to black drivers in the neighborhood as high-risk profiles and likely carriers, code words that didn't even try to hide their intent. The public outrage was immediate. News outlets ran segments nightly. Institutional racism in Houston law enforcement? Systematic bias against black drivers. New evidence emerges. Civil rights organizations flooded the precinct with demands for independent oversight. City council members, many of whom had comfortably ignored systemic issues for years, suddenly found themselves cornered under a blazing spotlight. And through it all, Shayla remained silent. No interviews. No speeches. No marches. She let the evidence speak louder than any microphone. But behind closed doors, she moved with relentless precision. Her attorneys filed an emergency motion requesting immediate external federal monitorship of Fulton Precinct 19. Full disclosure of all racial profiling complaints over the last decade. Personal depositions from the officers involved in her arrest, under oath. The judge assigned to the civil case, an African-American woman with a fierce reputation for fairness, granted the motion in full. And that's when the panic truly began inside the department. Supervisors who once mocked her arrest were now shredding documents at midnight. Officers whispered in break rooms, fearing subpoenas, fearing depositions, fearing truth. Because they knew. One lie under oath could end their careers. One document exposed could destroy them. Meanwhile, Shayla's story spread beyond Houston. National news outlets picked it up, framing her not as a victim, but as a warrior. A young black professional who refused to be silenced. A woman who chose the courtroom over chaos. Support poured in from everywhere. Law firms offering resources, civil rights groups offering backup, private citizens offering donations to her legal fund. But Shayla didn't want money. She didn't want pity. She wanted change. Real, tangible, irreversible. And now, standing at the center of the firestorm, she saw exactly how close she was to bringing the entire rotten structure crashing down. They had cuffed her because they thought she was powerless. Now they were learning too late that real power doesn't come from badges or uniforms. It comes from standing tall when they tell you to kneel. And Shayla Grant wasn't kneeling for anyone. The threats started quietly. An unmarked envelope slid under Shayla's office door late one evening. No note. No signature. Just a photo, a blurred image of her Lexus parked outside her apartment. Message received. Next came the phone calls. Blocked numbers. Heavy breathing. Sometimes just silence. Sometimes a whispered, mocking. Should have known your place. Shayla documented every incident. Every photo. Every call. She logged them meticulously, stored them on encrypted drives, handed copies straight to her legal team. Because she understood now, fully, brutally, what she was really up against. They weren't fighting for their badges anymore. They were fighting for survival, and scared men did desperate things. At the same time, pressure mounted from another front. A settlement offer arrived at her attorney's office, thick packet, heavy with legal jargon. $750,000. On the condition she dropped the lawsuit, signed a confidentiality agreement, and publicly clarified that her arrest was a misunderstanding. Jordan Miles, her lead attorney, slammed the offer onto the conference table. They think they can throw money at this, he spat. They think dignity is for sale. Shayla didn't even touch the packet. Tell them no, she said. Jordan smiled grimly. Good. Because I already did. The next morning, new tactics emerged. A local news blog, suspiciously close to law enforcement circles, published a hit piece. Architect or agitator? Shayla Grant's troubled past raises questions. The article was pure fiction. It dredged up old, unrelated parking tickets from her college days, spun vague insinuations about her attitude at past job sites, unnamed sources, unverifiable claims. It was transparent. It was desperate. And it failed. Within hours, real journalists shredded the article apart, pointing out the blatant racism, the obvious smear campaign. Public sympathy swung even harder in Shayla's favor. Supporters rallied outside the courthouse the next day, holding signs. We are Shayla. Driving while black is not a crime. Truth over power. Inside the courthouse, subpoenas flew like arrows. Every officer involved in her arrest, including the sergeant, the 2 patrol officers, the desk clerks, were ordered to testify under oath. Depositions began behind closed doors. And Shayla, sitting calmly across the table, watched them unravel. One officer admitted he never ran the plates. Another confessed they had no stolen vehicle report matching her car's description. The sergeant blustered and lied until confronted with security footage showing Shayla pointing at her registration on the dashboard while being ignored. Piece by piece, the false narrative crumbled. By the end of the week, Shayla's attorneys filed an amended complaint, adding charges of retaliation, harassment, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. It wasn't just about a wrongful arrest anymore. It was about a system so rotten it would rather destroy a black woman's life than admit it had been wrong. But Shayla Grant wasn't breaking. If anything, she grew stronger. Because now, the fight wasn't just personal. It was historic, and she was ready to see it through to the end. The collapse began from the inside. Under the weight of subpoenas, depositions, and relentless public scrutiny, the Fulton Precinct's command structure cracked open like dry earth. The first resignation came quietly. Deputy Chief Linda Holcomb, the supervisor who had authorized aggressive traffic enforcement in predominantly black neighborhoods, stepped down for personal reasons late on a Friday night. No press conference. No goodbyes. Just an internal memo and a locked office door. But Shayla wasn't interested in their quiet exits. She wanted the truth dragged into the light. The next week, the Department of Justice formally announced an independent investigation into the precinct's practices. Federal auditors arrived with sharp suits, briefcases, and zero patience. They combed through years of arrest records, complaint files, internal emails. What they found confirmed everything Shayla had fought to expose. Black drivers stopped and detained at 3 times the rate of white drivers. Complaints of excessive force routinely dismissed without investigation. Officers rewarded with favorable assignments after high numbers of urban neighborhood stops. The city couldn't deny it anymore. The mayor called a press conference, stone-faced, sweating under the hot Texas sun. We acknowledge there have been failures. We commit to transparency and reform. But the damage was already done, and Shayla knew empty words wouldn't fix a thing. Inside the courtroom, the civil case ground forward, slow, methodical, inevitable. Shayla sat through every deposition, every cross-examination. When officers tried to deflect blame, she remained stone-faced. When attorneys tried to paint her as angry or uncooperative, she responded with calm, blistering facts. When they implied she was intimidating simply for existing, she let the silence hang heavy, choking them with their own bias. And when the footage played again and again of her being yanked from her car, cuffed, and ignored while calmly pointing to her documents, no spin could save them. Behind the scenes, the city's attorneys grew desperate. Settlement offers doubled, then tripled. $1 million, $2 million, then $5 million. Each offer came with thicker confidentiality clauses, tighter gag orders, more conditions. Each time, Shayla said the same 2 words. No deal. Because for her, victory wasn't money. Victory was standing on the courthouse steps, free and proud, with the truth unchained for everyone to see. Victory was making sure no other black woman, no other black professional, would ever be forced to wonder if their education, their credentials, their very existence would still render them suspicious. Victory was accountability, and it was getting closer. Because the federal investigators weren't just auditing. They were preparing criminal referrals. Indictments loomed over the officers involved, not just for misconduct, but for conspiracy, perjury, and civil rights violations. Word leaked that the U.S. Attorney's Office had convened a grand jury. And suddenly, those same officers who had laughed, who had shoved, who had sneered, started pointing fingers at each other, desperately trying to cut deals, desperately trying to survive. But it was too late. The machine they built had turned on them. And Shayla Grant? She stood at the center of the storm, unbowed, unbroken. The reckoning was no longer coming. It had arrived. The final day of court arrived with gray skies and the heavy press of humidity in the air. Inside the packed courtroom, the tension crackled like static electricity. Reporters lined the back rows, cameras perched on shoulders. Community activists sat shoulder to shoulder, silent but burning. And at the front, Shayla Grant stood calm and steady, the living, breathing proof that dignity could survive even when everything else tried to crush it. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman who had tolerated no games throughout the trial, called the room to order. She flipped through the case file slowly, deliberately, as if weighing every word she was about to say. Then she looked up, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Miss Shayla Grant. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Somewhere in the back, someone let out a choked sob. Others exhaled in relief, fists clenched white-knuckled in silent celebration. The judge continued. The court further finds that the actions of the arresting officers constituted false arrest, racial profiling, malicious prosecution, and retaliation. Accordingly, this court awards compensatory damages in the amount of $3.8 million. She paused, letting the number settle like dust after a building collapse. Then her voice dropped lower, sharper. Additionally, the court awards punitive damages in the amount of $10 million, intended to deter future violations and signal the seriousness of these offenses. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The officers at the defense table sat frozen, their faces drained of all color. The city's lead attorney buried his face in his hands. The judge wasn't done. She rattled off her final rulings with icy precision. Fulton Precinct 19 placed under federal monitoring for a minimum of 5 years. Mandatory retraining of all officers on constitutional rights, verified quarterly by independent auditors. Personal liability for the sergeant and both arresting officers. No indemnification from the city's insurance fund. They would pay out of their own pockets. And then, the final blow. Formal recommendation for criminal charges of obstruction of justice against Sergeant Jim Rhodes and 2 supervisors. Shayla stood without flinching as the courtroom erupted around her. Her attorneys leaned in, murmuring congratulations. Strangers pressed hands to their mouths, tears shining in their eyes. But Shayla didn't smile. Not yet. This wasn't triumph. This was vindication. The system had tried to erase her and failed. Now, the weight of justice, real justice, crushed down on the very people who thought they could act without consequence. Outside, on the courthouse steps, a sea of people waited. Reporters shoved microphones forward, flashes strobed, voices shouted her name. But Shayla didn't rush. She stepped out into the thick Texas air, lifted her chin high, and paused. For a moment, the crowd stilled, the world holding its breath. She spoke only once, her voice carrying over the noise. This isn't just about me. This is about everyone who's been told they don't belong. Everyone who's been treated like a suspect instead of a citizen. We deserve to exist without fear. And we're not asking anymore. We're demanding. The crowd roared. But Shayla didn't linger. She descended the steps, moving through the cheers, the cameras, the flashing lights, like a force of nature. Not a symbol. Not a victim. A builder. A fighter. A woman who refused to disappear. And now, the walls that once trapped her were crumbling behind her, brick by rotten brick. The next morning, Houston woke up different. Not because the city had suddenly transformed. Not because injustice had magically disappeared overnight. But because for once, someone had fought and won. Quietly. Relentlessly. On her own terms. Shayla sat alone at a corner table in a small cafe downtown, a simple black coffee cooling in front of her. No cameras. No microphones. No courtrooms. Just a notebook open to a fresh, empty page. Outside the window, life moved on, buses hissing past, Suits rushing to offices, children laughing as they chased each other along cracked sidewalks. She watched for a while, breathing in the ordinary magic of freedom. Her phone buzzed every few minutes. Messages from activists, invitations to speak, offers to write books, give interviews, become a face of the movement. She answered none of them. Today wasn't about movements. Today was about memory. She thought back to that moment, the searing heat of the hood against her arms, the cold click of the cuffs, the voice in her ear saying, "You're under arrest." They had seen a thief, a suspect, a threat. They hadn't seen the woman who built city skylines with her hands, who mapped the dreams of others into steel and glass. They hadn't seen her strength. But now, they couldn't unsee it. And neither could she. She picked up the pen, clicked it once, and wrote 3 words on the top line of the page. Never disappear again. She closed the notebook with a soft thud, drained her coffee, and stepped out into the Houston sun. Not famous, not radical, just whole, free on her own terms. Not because the world had changed, but because she had forced it to see her. And now, every building she designed, every street she crossed, every room she entered would carry the quiet, unstoppable echo of that victory. Not loud, not flashing, just permanent, like stone, like steel. Because dignity, once reclaimed, can never be taken again. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire action and hope.